Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chat, believing in my own will. Web fire, math table, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, setting ready for that ghost kill.
Welcome back to another episode of the Maple Pill. Hope you're doing well again on this Thursday here in Canada. And we've got lots to talk about in this episode of the Maple Pill. And in fact, I'm going to kind of take us off on a tangent at the start here, just because there's a story that, a couple stories, I guess, really, that kind of interweave today that I wanted to start off today's discussion with. Then we'll get into our full course of pills later on in the show. But in case you guys missed it, I shared this on my Instagram stories earlier today, but the Globe and Mail came out with a new article based upon Bank of Canada research that said, I should have pulled it up, but it said something to the effect that, new Bank of Canada research shows that from, I think, like 2018 until 2021, that about 5% of Canadians have some sort of exposure or own Bitcoin. And that they studied those users, and they essentially determined that the average Bitcoiner was a young male with above average income that was educated, but was financially uneducated. And there's just something, one, about that sort of demographic that it kind of seems a little fishy, right? Like, these people are otherwise educated, they're earning above average income, and yet they're somehow financially illiterate, and yet they're involved in arguably, what's both an extremely simple as well as very complicated financial asset, right, or instrument, which is Bitcoin. And that definitely grinds my gears a little bit. But then last night, not sure if you guys saw, Jagmeet Singh came out with a new, I don't even know what this is, because it shouldn't really be a campaign video, because, he sided with the federal Liberal Party at this point in time. But anyways, essentially Jagmeet decided to put out a video that, if I was to frame it for Twitter, I would say, tell me you don't understand fiat monetary policy and central bankers without telling me you don't understand fiat money and central bankers. So that's what we're going to start off tonight's show with, is this Jagmeet Singh video, and then we'll go from there.
Cost of everything is going up. Some say it's because of supply chain issues. Some say it's because the government spent money on programs to help people in need. Here's the truth. Why is the cost of everything going up? Simple answer: greed. When the cost of things go up, it hurts some people, but it benefits those at the very top. And it's not the grocery store workers, those that stock the shelves, farmers that grow your food, or small businesses and grocery stores like this. Large corporations, big box stores, and big retail are making record profits in this time. Why should you pay more and more just so that large corporations can make more and more profit? It's a rigged system set up that way by liberals and conservatives. That's why New Democrats are demanding that we tax the excess profits of large corporations and invest that back into people. Housing, healthcare, the climate crisis. We can tackle all these problems if we make the super rich start paying their fair share. We have to end the free ride for the super rich.
So I gotta be honest, there's so much here to unpack in this little minute and 8-second clip. But a few things that really stand out to me is one, I really do believe Jagmeet thinks he can just make this straw man that there's evil, greedy capitalists, and they're the reason that our country's broken. They're the reason our government's in so much debt. They're the reason inflation's out of control. It's just really hoping that no one will actually check the receipts, right? That no one will actually bother to do any research or deep diving in the subject matter. And what's interesting is, between the NDP and Liberal and just in general, the Canadian government's disregard and usually demonization of Bitcoiners, it turns out Bitcoiners, at least in my opinion, based upon my personal anecdotal experiences, are actually some of the most educated people when it comes to financial policy, right? And understanding monetary policy and what actually central bankers do, and the unintended consequences oftentimes from their policies that they'll never admit to. And so one, that seems very rich to me. Two, again, this is just vapid rhetoric, right? Like, there's nothing here of substance. He doesn't actually point to any studies or any information to elaborate on how he made this determination that the actual reason that we're experiencing inflation right now is greed. And, before I even get into an article from Spencer Fernando on this, I thought I'd just scroll through the comments a bit, and I was actually shocked. Maybe it's the algorithm only showing me comments I'm going to agree with on this Jagmeet Singh post. But the first one that really grabbed my eyes here was from Stephen Panwazi, someone that we've regularly featured on the channel. But he's got a couple of good points here. Hey, Jagmeet, can you show me the data used to determine record profits? Grocery inflation is over 8%. Gross revenues, Loblaws down 4%, Metro up 2%, and Sobeys up 5.1%. Those are negative real earnings. Are you referencing this report? Funny thing, and so he references a report from the Star. It set off my alarm bells when the economists, unprompted, said government spending didn't cause inflation. Yeah, that really feels like more like government propaganda than what an economist would actually interpret, right? And don't get me wrong, I get it. I know that some of you guys are actually Keynesians that have drank all the Kool-Aid and believe in MMT and all that bullshit. But anyone that I think is really serious about understanding how our economy functions understands that inflation is something real, and inflation is caused by your underlying monetary asset, right? By what the central bankers do. And we've covered this in the past, but we've looked at the Bank of Canada's balance sheet, right, over the course of just the first year of the pandemic, grew by, I believe, 450%, if I'm remembering my numbers right. That was way above anything else from any other G7 country. And in fact, we actually looked at a graph in a previous episode of the Maple Pill that showed that other G7 countries didn't even top out at 100% increase in their governments or in their federal or central banks balance sheet, right? So again, to think that printing press goes burr has no impact on inflation is just so bizarre. And so Stephen goes on to elaborate here. It used 2021 fiscal year intentionally mixing base effect deflation comparison in H1, minimizing inflation pressures that appear in H2. Please use specialist sources like, and then he links to Dalhousie study. So the Dalhousie Agri-Food Analytics Lab that follows grocery prices up the supply chain. Here's Janet L. Music, an expert at food costs and grocery supplies, argues these aren't predatory profits, but it's easy for consumers to feel that way. And again, this is where, like, you know, right now it's so funny because mainstream media in Canada in particular is demonizing populism. But this literally is just a different form of populism that Jagmeet is hoping to tap into, right? He's hoping that everyone's going to be very frustrated. The prices are going up so much and they're going to be looking for someone to blame. And, you know, he's trying to offer a counterbalance here. Pierre Poilievre, you know, is actually using a basic understanding of economics and central banking and fiat currency. And then we've got Jagmeet that's like, well, aren't you mad that there's rich people out there? Again, you can be mad that there's rich people, but understand taxing them more isn't going to magically make inflation go away at all. At all. It's not even going to put enough of a dent unless he's going to start taxing them at 100% of their income to actually put a huge dent into our government's debt, right? The over $1 trillion in deficit that we currently find ourselves here in Canada, something that we've talked about in the past. From the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, right? They literally had to add another number onto their van, another digit, because it grew so much. Going into the pandemic, since the beginning of the pandemic, we've nearly doubled our entire government deficit during that period of time. And that's due to government spending, right? And the only way the government was able to do that was through things like quantitative easing, right? Reducing interest rates. All of these things that are monetary policies that actually impact things like inflation versus just wanting to find a convenient scapegoat that fits your political narrative. Like, hey, there's rich people, they're greedy, they're the reason this is a problem. But again, it was actually interesting because even some people that I think probably are more prone to agree with Jagmeet were still calling out some inconsistencies. Other people were pointing to this here is essentially a breakdown of what's going on in Shanghai right now due to the lockdowns and all the delays in the supply chain around it. Again, that's a decent argument. Other people highlighted the fact that Ukraine and Russia and the impacts that's going to have on fertilizer, as well as just, you know, Ukraine being one of the bread baskets of the world. And so just wanted to highlight this because I couldn't believe it. Like, and the cherry on top here is you're the dude that decided to back the federal liberals to make sure that there was never a confidence vote against them. So when you say that the reason the system is rigged is because conservatives and liberals decided to rig the system, you're literally supporting the same people that you're claiming rigged the system. This just feels so disingenuous, right? Like, honestly, I just feel like he's just running out the clock here till he gets his pension. Maybe I'm just a little too black-pilled on Jagmeet, but I honestly can't believe it, right? And again, you literally propped up a dude that's from a political dynasty, like a family political dynasty in Canada, one of the few, right? Like we don't, one, have nearly as long of a history as the US or other countries in regards to that sort of thing. But second, up until recently, we haven't like kind of leaned into this sort of political dynasty the way we often see in the United States, right? Whether you're thinking of like the Bushes, the Clintons, the Kennedys, the Bidens, whoever, oftentimes when you dig into these family trees, you realize like, oh shit, they actually had a lot of, political relations before becoming popular, right? Or their parents were politicians. So it's fascinating to me to see Jagmeet choose to make this the hill to start his war cry on. Although if this means that tomorrow all of a sudden he's going to pull support from the Liberals, well, hey, let's talk then. Next from Spencer Fernando, just building upon this, either Jagmeet Singh is completely ignorant about economics or he's hoping everyone else is. And I just want to put forward here, Spencer, I think you got it wrong. I think it's both. I think it's all of the above in this case. I don't think Jagmeet would actually care to do the heavy lifting of understanding what's actually driving things like inflation when he can easily just create a scapegoat like greedy rich people. And two, I think that he really does think that millennials don't understand. And I really do believe he's trying to speak a lot to the next generation, so millennials and below. And that's often been, kind of a pillar of the NDP or more progressive sort of leaning political parties. I really do believe that he expects everyone to have the same level or less of intelligence as himself when it comes to economics and economic policy. The funny thing is, a lot of millennials and younger, they're actually really mad about the fact that they're maybe never going to be able to afford to buy a house, particularly if you've seen what's gone on in Canadian real estate over the last couple of years during COVID-19 and lockdowns. And because of that, I think that there's an above average level of intelligence amongst young people in understanding what a central bank actually is, why they're actually evil entities, and understanding that it's, inflation is actually driven by the government. I mean, hell, every single central banker has a position when it comes to inflation, right? They set targets. Our target is supposed to be between 1% and 3% here in Canada. In most developed countries, they're going to have a target of 2% inflation. So this idea that, you can put out a 1-minute video with just rhetoric of like tax the rich. Really? Is that how little you think of the average Canadian voter? But anyways, enough of me ranting and raving about Jagmeet. Let's get into our regular episode of the Maple Pill now. And we're going to get into our first blue pill story of the day. Canada open to more measures to curb housing speculation, minister says. And I'm definitely getting mixed signals these days when I talk to people in real estate still. Obviously, I've got a pretty deep Rolodex in that space. And it seems like it really depends upon where you are in the market. So both geographically as well as in regards to price point and what you currently think the state of the market is. So people that are in still relatively more affordable cash flowing rental markets, they still seem very bullish to me when they're talking about the future of real estate and where real estate prices are likely to go. When I'm talking or listening to people that are in, Vancouver, Toronto, and other like major expensive urban centers in Canada, a lot of them seem to really believe that we're seeing more than just a soft landing when it comes to pricing. It sounds like a lot of them, especially the realtors here, they're experiencing a lot less activity at open houses, a lot less of multiple offers. They're seeing price reductions from their competitors when it comes to listings and things of that nature. So I think right now it's still too early to know if we're coming or going, but I think we're definitely going to continue to see, in Canada, at least, housing and affordability being a top line item in all of mainstream media. Now, again, who gets blamed for this really does depend upon your political narrative. But just wanted to highlight this because I think the government is such a battleship that it actually takes them a while, longer than it should, in my opinion, to actually correct course. And so I think that they realized the last 2 years have just been redonkulous in Canadian real estate. And so they've been trying to figure out how to correct course. And now they're just in the process of correcting course. And some of the more interesting analysts and pundits of Canadian real estate that I follow, they seem to think that there's likely going to be an overcorrection by the government right at the time that we actually already have kind of a natural correction occurring in the market. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but wanted to share that. And then another article here from Reuters. Canada inflation could be at peak, but that is little relief for central bank. I'm just going to call a hard bullshit on this. I don't see why or how you could come to the conclusion that we're actually at the peak here, right? And these central bankers are the same ones that last summer told us we're going to have cheap interest rates for the foreseeable future for a long time, right? Again, similar, different experts, but we had the CMHC at the start of the lockdown tell us, reminder, that they expected to see a huge correction in real estate. Yeah, they said that we might see as much of a 10 to a 20% pullback in real estate prices. Instead, we saw prices increase by 20%. I mean, so if you're off by 30 or 40%, what's the big deal, right? If you're a government employee, there's no real consequences because it's not really a meritocracy. So you can really just hide your inefficiencies and your errors. Next from the Hill, and this one actually, this one's interesting in my opinion. Musk says Twitter is biased against conservatives. Facts say otherwise. And so at first I was like, okay, let's see where this goes. And so essentially, again, I encourage you guys to read this article from start to finish to get a full understanding. And there's a link in the video description down below to this article, as well as everything we're going to talk about tonight. But this is in regards to there's very little research done in this field in the first place. And so this is referring to one individual study. The researchers identified 9,000 politically engaged Twitter users in October 2020, half Democratic and half Republican. They tracked the sample for 7 months after the November 2020 election. During that period, Twitter suspended 7.7% of the Democrats. In contrast, the platform suspended 35.6% of the Republicans, a more than fourfold difference. However, they immediately go on the defensive here and say that this is not a sign of Twitter, having a bias towards Democrats or a bias being anti-Republican. In fact, their claim here is simply that Republicans disproportionately share a lot of misinformation. And so I think there's a couple things to note here, right? This is right around the time of the American elections. So there is a lot of controversy around those elections. I can't say anything about them, obviously, because this is on YouTube. So when you're on YouTube, you have to admit that the U.S. elections were the freest and fairest elections in the history of mankind. But definitely there's people that maybe don't agree with that. And I think that there's more than anecdotal evidence to at least justify them wanting to explore that thread. And I believe that, the researchers here and the person writing this article, they would just denounce that as purely fiction, right? That's 100%, that's 100% fiction, right? That's fake news, that's misinformation, disinformation. Again, these same people, back in 2016, when Hillary Clinton was questioning whether Trump would follow the election, whether Russia would steal in the election and things of that nature, somehow magically over the 4 years of Trump being in power, the system got completely fixed and healed. Despite the fact that even back in 2000, you might have questioned the election results, right? So this is something that's been going on for a while, but it's only recently that we decided that this was pure disinformation that had to essentially be memory hold from the internet, right? Particularly from social media platforms. So misinformation sites had been labeled as untrustworthy by either professional fact-checking organizations or surveys of politically balanced and demographically representative lay people, which that's rich. I don't know. I just don't know how you can say that when you actually look at any of these fact-checking organizations to see if they've got any sort of political bent, any sort of bias, and where their funding comes from. It becomes very easy to become suspect, right, or suspicious of those entities. But let's just take a step back from all this discussion and let's just really quickly explore, even what individuals might consider misinformation and what's, PC, what's politically correct and what's not these days. Well, if you dead name someone on social media these days, that can immediately get you banned, right? Suspended. Dead naming being essentially using someone's name before they transitioned, right? So if they were a male and they transitioned to female and you use their male name, that can literally get you deleted off social media. If you misgender someone, right? If you make fun of someone that's transitioned, again, that can immediately just get you memory hold on a lot of social media platforms. Well, for a lot of people, I think on the right or Republicans, they actually believe that there is just, two sexes, two genders, whatever. And you can't just have people identifying as whatever they want, right? Again, even thinking about something like abortion. For someone on the left, abortion's your body, your choice. For someone on the right, they literally see people killing babies. And depending on how you like which side of the aisle you're on here, you can understand how really quickly one side might consider the other side's misinformation. So anyways, I think this is all bullshit in my opinion. Again, another question I'd immediately have, of the 9,000 accounts that were picked, how do you ensure that those are representative, right? That you've got an equal amount of like extreme liberals and extreme Republicans and things of that nature. Yeah. Anyways, this does not pass the sniff test in my opinion, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and, you know, your takes on all this, guys. Do you believe that Musk is right, that Twitter is biased against conservatives? Or do you think the Hill's right here, that the facts say otherwise? Let me know your hot take. Next from CTV News, Polyev defends investments in rental properties while campaigning to address housing affordability. Again, this is like an economics lesson here, but really the main point I want to make is, one, we're going to continue to see landlords demonized in the foreseeable future. That's a given. And especially we're absolutely going to see small landlords particularly demonized because, one, they're not a powerful lobbyist interest, right? They're not going to have the same sort of connections that, you know, powerful REITs or hedge funds are going to have when it comes to political access. Second, to want to blame affordability or the housing crisis on investors is to completely overlook the role central bankers and monetary policy have played, right? Investors are just reacting to the rules of the game. Essentially, your government, your central bank sat down the population, was like, here's the rules, this is how the game works. And then all of a sudden, now that the results of the game seem tilted or broken or whatever, they want to demonize one set of players in that regards. No, what should have happened is we should have just never had the crazy fiat monetary policy. We should just not have fiat money in the first place. But second, we should absolutely have not gone into $1 trillion in deficit. We shouldn't have done quantitative easing to the point where we literally 450% increased the central bank or the Bank of Canada's balance sheet, right? So again, it's interesting here. Way down at the very bottom, they also mentioned that, oh, by the way, Chrystia Freeland also has a rental property. And you're like, but Polyev is the one that we need to really go crucify for having rental properties. Next from CBC News, mum furious grade 8 students at Woodstock, Ontario school must make posters for anti-abortion groups contest. And so at first I was like, holy shit, that actually seems pretty fucked. The public school, they'd be making children make anti-abortion posters. I was just like, I was flabbergasted when I saw this from CBC News. Then I read on a little bit further. The posters being made at Woodstock School will be graded and entered in the Right to Life Coalition contest. I was like, man, this is fucked. But then the second line here in the article, an Ontario Catholic school is under fire for grade 8 assignments that require students to make anti-abortion posters for marks and the chance to win cash prizes. I was like, okay, well, this is a little bit different, right? You know, it is actually a Catholic school. I feel like you could probably fit the word Catholic in here, right? Mom furious grade 8 Catholic students at Woodstock, Ontario. And I think that would give a much different perspective on this. Now, again, straight up, I can't imagine that the Catholic school board is actually going to want this to make this a hill to die on. So I imagine they're going to back away from this. And I imagine that they're just going to try and make this disappear. Just that's my personal hot take in regards to where we are as a society. You know, even if the Catholic Church and the Catholic School Board believe that abortion is murder and, you know, they want to push an anti-abortion agenda, I can't imagine they'd actually feel comfortable doing that in the light of day, just in our current progressive society. But I do think that like that, the religion here does impact the interpretation of all this, right? So like if you're going to send your kid to a Catholic school board, they are going to be exposed to religion, right? They are going to be exposed to certain religious views. So just, I don't know, food for thought. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions on this though, because originally when I read this, I was like, this is the opposite of what I would have expected in a public school system. But again, once I understood it was from the Catholic school board, I was like, okay, a little bit different. Again, if you're just asking my personal preference, I'd be like, it just seems like a stupid idea. You know, this is going to be a politically sensitive subject matter. Are your grade 8 students really going to make such an amazing poster that it's going to change the world? I don't think so. You probably could have found a different sort of project for them to participate in. So, this feels like someone trying to blow out of proportion what the school board was doing, but also feels like, or at least this Woodstock school, but also feels like, I weighed into this. I don't remember ever doing anything like that when I was going to Catholic school, but maybe I just blacked out those days. And then one little thing I did want to say here, though, and maybe we'll do a whole separate video on it because I'm definitely not going to be able to do it justice in this short little segment, but my thoughts and views have drastically changed over the years in regards to abortion. And I just wanted to share, at least high level, some of the reasons why they've changed. So had you asked me back in like my 20s, I would have been like, yeah, you know, like pro-choice, it's a woman's body. She should decide whatever goes on. You know, as I've learned and like read into the subject matter a little bit more, you know, something that always stands out to me is the idea that even when it was legalized in the United States, common refrain or slogan that was used was what was it? Rare, safe, and or like legal. Yeah, rare, safe, and legal when it came to abortions. And I think honestly, a big part of the discussion here is we need to actually, like, if you actually want to have a real discussion and explore someone's position when it comes to abortion, I think you need to really understand what do they even define as abortion. Because when I've heard some of the pro-life arguments, and I've heard how they frame their discussions of this, all of a sudden it became much more palatable to me, right? And I think as I've even just looked a little bit more into the science, you know, the biggest question I think for most people is, when does life begin? Because I think the moment that you've got a separate life, that's where it's going to become difficult to just say that, like, yep, you should be able to abort that separate life. But one of the questions or one of the discussion points that has really stood out to me over the last a couple of years as I've looked into this and just got a little bit more educated is people, you know, almost completely reframing this, right? So like, well, did you have to get an abortion, or could that life have become viable at that stage? And I think that is a big question, right? You know, medicine has advanced dramatically over the last few decades. So now, you know, a much earlier term pregnancy can become viable than it would have been, you know, even like 30, 40 years ago. So I think that that's one like thread to at least explore if you guys are sitting on the fence or you just want to dive deeper into a hot subject matter, because maybe, hey, you know, Thanksgiving dinners aren't politically charged enough and you want to take it up to the next level. But the second one is really understanding, like, how do you define abortion? And so a lot of times, you know, the examples that would immediately come to mind for me that would naturally, like when I was younger, make me pro-choice was the idea of like, well, if it's like the mother's life or the baby's life, then you know, like, shouldn't the mother have the right to abort? And I'd be like, oh yeah, like, obviously. And I think that's where it really comes down to understanding, like, the intentions behind the medical procedure that's occurring as well. So again, if you're forced with like a fork in the road decision of, ooh, we can either, you know, save the mom and risk the child, that again isn't actually an abortion, right? Like, if you try and actually bring the child to like viability, right? Like, rather than aborting it to save the mother, you deliver it and then the child lives or dies based upon the viability of that. I guess, anyways, just want to share that because my thoughts have really evolved over the last 5-6 years on this subject matter. And I think now I land a lot more firmly in the anti-abortion side of things. But again, the devil's really in the details when we're talking about these things, in my opinion. Next, from the Toronto Star, every man for himself, confusion reigns on how to behave in a pandemic wave, void of guidelines. So in the absence of government mandates, tools to curb COVID-19 spread have suddenly become a personal choice. While some people are eager to embrace new freedoms, others feel vulnerable, angry, and abandoned. And this, I don't want to explore this too deep because I think you guys know my position. I imagine you're likely have a similar perspective. But it is important to understand how mainstream media, the legacy media, right, the corporate press, is choosing to frame this discussion, right? And they don't view it like, we've discussed this in the past, and I've even written a blog or an essay on it, the difference between like negative and positive rights, right? Negative rights is the rights from interference. Positive rights is something like where like you're actually entitled to something. And the moment we get into those positive rights, it becomes a minefield because you essentially have to force someone else to comply, right? So you need to interfere with someone else in order for you to have your positive right. That's why negative rights are so important that people understand this distinction, because right now people seem to feel like they've got the right to 100% safety, right? They've got the right to not be triggered. They've got the right to not have their feelings hurt. They've got the right to not have to breathe the same air as you unless it's been filtered through a COVID mask. And that's never been my understanding of like rights. That's never been my understanding of freedom or liberty either. It's supposed to be freedom from interference. That's what government really that should be their number one priority. However, it's literally the exact opposite because we live in the age of hilarious and the clown timeline. But anyways, just want to share that perspective from the Toronto Star. And let's get into our first red pill story of the day. A new official residence for Canada's prime ministers. Feds draw up possible plans for bigger, grander location. So rundown 24 Sussex wouldn't be suitable for official business, even if they were spruced up, says report. I couldn't disagree with this more. One, if you're the leader of a country, it shouldn't really matter whether you're meeting me in a dank basement or you're meeting me in a palace. It should really be, your country that speaks for you, not your surroundings, right? If the only way that you can be an effective leader is to live in a posh mansion, you're not the sort of effective leader I want. Secondly, just a reminder, but we're over $1 trillion in debt here as a country. Is this really where we want to be spending our money? Or should we actually be looking at someday trying to figure out how to balance that gosh darn budget? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I would actually choose the former in that set of choices. Next from National News Watch, documents detail push and push back on Liberal promise to block unvaccinated from EI. And this is interesting, especially if you guys just want to go down this rabbit hole, but Ottawa internal government documents show that the Liberals' pledge to prevent unvaccinated people from accessing jobless benefits didn't eliminate all avenues for them to enter the employment insurance system. The briefing notes prepared for Employment Minister Carla Qualtrough says that unvaccinated workers would qualify for EI sickness benefits even if they are sick with COVID-19. Again, this is just a reminder because I'd honestly even forgotten about this because there's been so many other crazy things, I guess, going on in the world and as well as in Canada. But when people are constantly like, what rights have you lost, right? Like, stop being a crybaby about mask mandates, vaccine passports, and all this shit. It's like, no, you guys literally tried to isolate a portion of the population because of their personal medical choices. This is not okay. This should never be normalized. And I think that as more information comes out, whether it's through freedom of information requests, whether it's through just, general disclosures from the government, we need to hold these individuals accountable regardless of what happens, right? If tomorrow they wake up from their COVID hysteria and decide to grant us all our rights and freedoms back, there still needs to actually be consequences for the actions they've taken up until this point in time, in my opinion. Next from the counter signal, CTV News claims spike in heart attacks caused by traffic noises. So good news, guys. It turns out everything but the COVID shot causes heart attacks. So I'm pretty sure, based upon everything I've read in mainstream media, that's literally the only thing that we can certainly say doesn't cause heart attacks, because it turns out just about everything else is causing heart attacks. And I guess that's just a sign of the times. But according to studies and experts cited by CTV News, other reasons that someone may have an increased risk of experiencing a heart attack include working out while angry, Christmas Eve, the winter season, shoveling snow, living in a low-income neighborhood, and having sex. Yeah, so again, just about everything causes heart attacks, but don't worry, it's definitely not the COVID shot. That's disinformation. Next from the counter signal, Ontario fully vaccinated 3 times as likely to be infected with COVID-19. And I see a bunch of back and forth these days on social media. The first thing, whenever we're having these discussions, we need to understand, are we talking about the just total population numbers, or are we talking about per capita? If we're talking about per capita, then it's important to understand that these are usually being normalized or adjusted, right? Again, some studies and some data that comes out is even being adjusted for like age groups and age brackets. Because again, I know sometimes people will point out like, well, there's a greater chance that immunocompromised and older people will choose to get the shots. And so it's not fair to, compare them against what's presumed to be an otherwise healthy group of unvaccinated individuals. But as of April 21st, those who are not considered fully vaccinated have a 7-day average case rate of 12.4 cases per capita, while those who have received 2 or more doses have a case rate of 38.11 cases per capita. 12.79 fully vaccinated cases, and 25.32 vaccinated with booster dose cases per capita. So again, it's important to break that stuff out and just really understand, are we looking at apples to apples comparisons when having these discussions? And you guys want a good follow on Instagram for this stuff. Tommy Caldwell, I think he's doing some of the best posting on Instagram in this regards. I think it's TC Fitness Mentor is his Instagram handle, if I remember correctly. And he's even got a podcast where he's regularly discussing this stuff. And I really appreciate Keenan and the stuff he puts out on Countersignal. But honestly, a lot of this felt like it was from a post I saw from Tommy a couple days before. Next, from the National Post, Geoffroy, Ecos boss Frank Graves' ill-advised threat to keep Pierre Poilievre from winning. The longtime Liberal supporter crossed the line. Now, this is in the comment section, obviously, of National Post. We've discussed this in the past. I really do think, though, everyone should be entitled to their political opinions, and they should be able to say it in the public square. No issue there. However, for someone that's one of the leading research associates, right, that the government's given 1.6 or 1.7, I forget, we covered it earlier in a previous episode, but I believe $1.7 million almost in government contracts, I think you should be aware of how that's going to be interpreted, right? When you essentially declare a personal crusade against Pierre Poilievre and you say things like, I don't make idle threats, I'm going to make sure you're not prime minister. I feel like, had some Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters said that about Justin Trudeau, he'd probably have called it Emergency Act and would have tried to freeze their bank accounts, imprison them, right, for causing mischief and things of that nature. So anyways, just thought that was interesting, though I was glad to see the National Post at least covering it to some extent. Next, from the Globe and Mail, Ottawa scales back drug price reforms that would have cost Big Pharma billions. All I got to say is thank God someone's thinking about Big Pharma in their time of need. The last couple of years have been really rough on Big Pharma, right? People have been tweeting about them meanly and things of that nature. Sure, I know the Liberals just started a coalition party essentially with the NDP and promised that within 3 to 5 years, we'll have a national pharmacare program. But in the meantime, let's make sure we make those pharmaceutical companies rich. Yeah, this is actually true somehow. So I'm just going to read the highlights here of the start of the article, but again, really encourage you guys to read this cover to cover. Ottawa is dramatically scaling back regulatory changes to reduce the cost of drugs 5 years after heralding them as a once-in-a-generation effort to cut costs and shave billions off industry profits. So again, Jagmeet Singh, the guy that's claiming that all these greedy corporations are getting filthy rich because your groceries are going up, he's the same guy that's backing Justin Trudeau, who just decided to scale back price reductions when it comes to pharmacare, right? The federal reprieve for pharmaceutical companies follows a series of court challenges, which the government either lost or remain outstanding. However, Ottawa didn't cite the legal battles in justifying the watered-down policy, but instead pointed to unspecified changes to the pharmaceutical landscape brought on by the pandemic. If I was a conspiracy theorist, I'd probably say something like, you know what, this is probably just one more sign that our government is essentially captured by Big Pharma, right? That, in fact, one of the reasons that maybe Justin Trudeau has committed us to years and years of vaccines from Big Pharma for COVID-19, regardless of whether they're going to be effective down the road, the reason that we're literally throwing out millions of vaccines a month right now, again, who knows if that'll continue indefinitely, but right now we literally are throwing out millions of dollars or millions of expired vaccines, which is also the equivalent of millions of dollars. But let's make sure Big Pharma makes more money in other parts of pharma as well. Yep, that's where we are as a society. Priorities, right? And now I just want to highlight this from Dr. Julie Paness. Do you think we have a right to feel protected from other people? Is that basic democratic right? Is it Canadian right? What do you think? And this kind of highlights what I was chatting about earlier, right? This idea that people almost believe they've got the freedom from their fellow citizens now, rather than freedom from interference. And there's a big difference here. And I think people need to understand this.
Hi, everyone. Julie here. So this week, in terms of the What Do You Think episode, I've been thinking a lot about the ideas that have emerged over the last 2 years and some of the ideas that we're finding to be salient among people. And one of the things I think is really interesting is this idea that we seem to have developed the view that we have the right not just to be protected from other people, but to feel protected from other people. So as it's becoming clear, as more evidence is mounting to suggest that the COVID vaccines don't reduce transmission, such that you are not made more protected by what someone else does, whether or not someone else gets vaccinated. And yet we still seem to want to hold on to this idea that we expect other people to do it, other people to mask, other people to get vaccinated, other people to make distances for our own sake. So do you think it's the case that we do have a right to feel protected from other people? Is that a basic democratic right? Is it a basic Canadian?
Again, this is a great line of inquiry that I think, honestly, all of us need to ask ourselves. My answer is a hard no. We don't have the right to feel protected from our fellow citizens. It's the same sort of logic we see right now in regards to Del Duca saying that if he was to become premier, we covered this yesterday, that within a year he would ban handguns. Again, the data shows that, if I remember correctly from yesterday's show, 80% of murders are committed with illegal handguns, right? Or like illegal guns. And that more than 50% of the people that die from gunshots are actually like gang members, right? Like where they're known to each other, the individuals that are being killed here, criminals known to each other. So again, this idea that we have the right to feel protected from someone, it's the same sort of logic that's used to say, like, I have the right to feel protected from you not misgendering me. No, you absolutely do not. I'm allowed to hurt your feelings. Like, again, it may not be a nice thing to do. It might even be a douchey thing to do. But I should have the right to be a douchebag, because even your definition of douchebag is going to vary depending upon your own personal opinion, right? Your personal perspective. Jumping over now to CBC. And this one actually, like, my blood pressure probably doubled when I read this, because I just couldn't believe the hypocrisy here. Attacking opponents as socialists and dictators weakens the fabric of our democracy. While such terms have a textbook definition, they also have a strategic meaning when used by politicians. Yeah, CBC, you're the same ones that immediately jumped on the bandwagon of that all the truckers were racist, misogynist, they were Russian agents, they were Trumpian or trumpet. What terms do they use again for Trump supporters? Whatever sort of derogatory framing they could use for Trump supporters. And yet, the moment someone calls your poster child, your poster boy here, Justin Trudeau, dictator, that's a line too far. That's actually going to weaken the fabric of our democracy. Not the fact that he enacted the Emergencies Act against his own citizens for the first time in Canadian history. Not the fact that he chose to allow the freezing of Canadian bank accounts. Again, protester bank accounts for the first time in Canadian history. That shit weakens the fabric of our democracy a lot more than any politician or any news outlet calling Justin Trudeau dictator. Why the fuck do my taxes go to pay for you, CBC? I am so over that. And again, this is like mild down, watered down version of me being upset about this, because originally I was ranting and raving to myself. Next from the Western Standard, sky-high fertilizer prices ramp up pressures on Canadian farmers. Again, this is going to become a normal headline. Let me pull this in. Zoom. So I think there's going to be some producers that will decide either to not plant or to plant less. So I don't think the price increases that consumers have seen up to now are finished. That pressure is just continuing to increase. Sid Marcus Jansen, first vice president of the board for Fruits and Vegetable Growers of Canada. So again, if you guys want to understand more about the pressures right now that farmers are facing, check it out. Video description down below. But yeah, honestly, if you're in the position in life right now where 10% groceries like actually dramatically impact your family's budget, I think you should at least be considering taking proactive measures, because I think that this is going to be a trend that's going to continue in the future. So one of the first ways you can start looking at saving money is buying more staple oriented, less more staples, right? Focus on buying in bulk. Again, trying to buy direct, right? Start going to local farmers markets, start dealing with your local farmer when it comes to meat purchases. It's dramatic, the savings you can have. Again, there is an upfront investment on that side of thing, but if you're looking at your actual cost, like per pound of meat or per pound of produce, it's usually substantially cheaper if you're going directly to a local farmer and negotiating terms or a deal with them. Next from the Toronto Sun, countrywide action to crack down on handguns needed, advocates tell federal minister. And honestly, like, the conspiracy theorist in me just wants to say, like, how convenient that literally like 2 days ago, Del Duca comes out saying that he wants to ban handguns. And then immediately across the board, the Canadian press, we see this was in the Toronto Sun, but I also saw it in CTV News. And I believe it was also in the Toronto Star. And it was probably in CBC too. And I just didn't see the headline. But this is just too convenient, right? Even let's just focus on how long we've been doing this show. Over the course of the last 69, we're on episode 69, by the way. Over the course of the last 69 episodes, there hasn't been one headline about handguns, right, that we've discussed. There hasn't been one headline about having to ban handguns in Canada. And then in 1 week, we get two different sets of headlines. The first one by a provincial premier candidate for Ontario, saying he wants to ban it. And then immediately afterwards, mainstream media coming out with a bunch of press coverage that seems to back up his perspective and his choice or decision on the handgun situation. Yeah, just seems a little fishy. Actually, more than a little fishy. It seems like a whale of a coincidence. Next from Rebel News, an exercise in futility, London area school board reinstates unenforceable mask mandates. I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden we see every woke school board now decide to virtue signal by saying like, hey, we tried to reinforce masks. Because again, they don't actually give a shit about your kids. If they did, they would actually look at the fucking data and they would understand that the kids are not at risk here, right? And any immunocompromised kid, exceptions can be made on a case-by-case basis for that kid. Again, and you can still wear your own mask, right? In fact, you can wear even more effective masks than just the random cloth masks that a lot of people wear if you are in a very at-risk category. At the same time, if you're a child and you're in that at-risk category, you're actually in more danger from the flu, right? Based upon the information that we've seen and we've even discussed in previous episodes here of the Maple Pill. So, yeah. Using copy and paste language from Ottawa Carleton School Board's attempt to yet again require masks, trustees for the Thames Valley District School Board voted to enact their own meaningless mandate. Now, I know a lot of you maybe either live in London, Ontario, or live nearby. Maybe your kids go to the Thames Valley District School Board because, hey, that's where I used to be based out of before I moved up to the Citadel. If you guys are, understand that, like, London fucked up in a big way. I'm pretty sure that last time they voted in 3 NDPs, right? With all sorts of their own woke agendas at the provincial level for Queen's Park. You need to go and look for alternatives, right? I want to highly recommend you guys check out Tommy Caldwell, who I already brought up previously in this episode. He's running for New Blue. I forget which district he's in or which riding in London, but he'll be in one of the ridings in London. And again, check him out. I don't think you'll be disappointed if you were to check out Tommy and his positions on things. And again, very fact-oriented, which is important in these times of disinformation, right? Mises Institute, there's a reason George Washington warned against entangling relationships. Yeah, like up until the Monroe Doctrine in the United States, right? Like it was all about being anti-interventionist. And that's a good thing, right? Like we shouldn't be wanting these foreign abroad wars where we just go traipsing into people's backyards and fucking up their shit. We've got more than enough things to worry about in our own backyard. Interventionist sentiments have prevailed in the guiding of U.S. foreign policy, one could argue, since 1917. I would say even like 1913, at least, like the Federal Reserve. But from the U.S. participation in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Persian Gulf Wars, the Afghanistan War, the War on Terror, to say nothing of other minor interventions by force in Grenada, Panama, the Balkans, Somalia, etc., one could conclude that the United States is not shy about using military force to advance its international inclinations. This is not by accident. shows no signs of abating and coincides with the propagation of the internationalist interventionist mantra we now are witnessing within the legacy media and on social media. Governments around the world comprised of many adherents to the internationalist vision of a new world order now seek to use the war in Ukraine as their latest cabal to divert global resources to their next great cause. These well-manicured, effete, and sometimes partially coherent leaders threaten and coerce unified action against what they have deemed to be the next object of their obsession to advance their vision, Russia. These elites deal in an ethereal strategic realm of grand visions based on endless amounts of financing from central banks and perhaps a future reliance on cannon fodder provided by the masses, read working class, who are on the hook to pay the bills rung up by their social betters. Jeff Deist, in his most recent article, captures the spirit of these elites very well. So yeah, again, I wish there was a way I could just force everyone to read every Mises Institute and Ron Paul Institute news article, or like a opinion article. I haven't found a way yet, so I'm just going to essentially almost read one to you guys on every episode of the Maple Pill. Next from True North, U.S. extends border ban on unvaccinated, so some Canadians are still trapped. This was definitely disheartening. This is a black pill, in my opinion. This is also inconvenient for me in my personal life, so I hope that we see a quick about face, but we'll see how that actually plays out. Now, let's move on to a clown pill story of the day. This one's a little bit different than most of our clown pills. Usually it's very obvious why this is funny. This one, we're going to have to watch a video, but Jen Psaki, she's someone that I love to hate. So again, like I kind of like her attitude and I like her feistiness when she's interacting. I just wish, at least once in a while she would tell the truth.
Why has President Biden been so sheltered from the press?
In what way? He just did a press conference several weeks ago.
Well,
he takes questions from the press nearly every day.
Okay, I'm going to come back at you on that. In his first year, Joe Biden held 2 solo news conferences in the White House, and he held 5 on foreign trips. And take a look at this. In his first year, Mr. Biden sat down for 28 interviews with reporters. That compares to 95 in the same period of time for Donald Trump and 162 for Barack Obama. By comparison, Jen, that's sheltered.
Well, the statistic you didn't include there, Chris, is how many times did he take questions from reporters at the White House? I think it was about
he's had
double
two solo news conferences.
No, beyond that. I mean, nearly every day at the White House, he takes questions from the White House press corps.
Yeah, but Jen,
2 questions, 3 questions, 8 questions.
Yeah, but Jen,
why is that different?
Well,
He's done that
I'll tell you exactly
2 or 3
why.
times more than his predecessors.
I'll tell you exactly why that's different, because when you're standing there, you can take a question, you can answer it, you can slough it off, and you move on. It in no way compares, and oftentimes he gives a partial answer and walks away. It in no way compares to sitting down with a reporter for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and having, you can't move away. You can't duck it. You got to sit there and answer the question and the follow-up. It's not the same thing.
We can agree to disagree on that, Chris. I think how he...
Yeah, I don't know. There's just something about that exchange that I find very funny. And, Chris Wallace maybe won't say it, but I will absolutely say it. Even in the stat that Jen brings up here, where she's like, oh, but he'll answer questions. Yeah, he said on multiple occasions, okay, they've told me who to, answer questions from, right? Like they write down the name of the reporter so he can call upon them. So that reporter that's already had their question vetted can ask a question that they've already written down the script for Joe Biden to read off. And he still somehow seems to fuck that up at least half the time. Wild. Anyways, moving on. Let's talk about the white pill. Michael Geist. Michael, just in and of himself, he's a white pill, in my opinion, because we need more people trying to hold the government accountable to the people. I don't know how else to say it. And just want to highlight this because, again, while this story, I could make an argument that this is black pill. I'm glad that we've got people like Michael that's actually going to try and hold the government accountable, try and get to the bottom of things and, make those requests for information so that we can actually understand what the hell is going on in our own government. The rest of the online harms consultation story, Canadian Heritage forced to release hundreds of public submissions under access to information law. So for months, The results of the government's online harms consultation was shrouded in secrecy as the Canadian Heritage refused to disclose the hundreds of submissions it received. I launched a page that featured publicly available submissions, links reposted below, including 25 submissions from organizations and companies, as well as 6 individual expert submissions. I later followed up with 2 posts that provided further detail on the publicly available submissions here and here. Earlier this year, Canadian Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez released a What We Heard report that again blocked making the actual submissions public, but provided a summary that left little doubt that the government plans were widely criticized and required a policy reset. In the meantime, I filed an Access to Information Act request to compel disclosure by law of the consultation submissions. It took many months, but this week the department released the results. While some submissions may be excluded, third parties can object on certain grounds. I've obtained hundreds of additional submissions in a 1,162-page file. These can be obtained directly from the Canadian Heritage by launching an informal access request at no cost with the department. The file to request is A2021-00174, or click here for the full file for the moment. So again, I just really appreciate that there's people out there like Michael that are getting into this, because we do need to understand how many people disagree with the government's perspective when it comes to online, understanding online harms. And essentially, we know that this all actually just boils down to the government's focusing on trying to implement new bills in Parliament to censor Canadians, right? They want to make sure that only vetted, government-approved journalists are considered journalists. They want to make sure that only those government-approved journalists get preferential treatment from big tech, and they want to make sure big tech has to pay those preferred journalists, or journalist outlets, I should say, those media companies. And again, this is all just trying to stack the deck in the favor of giant corporations that have already received hundreds of millions of dollars from the Canadian government, and businesses or entities like CBC, which receive over $1 billion a year. Yeah. Sorry, this was supposed to be a white pill. I'm thankful for guys like Michael. Next from AP News, I believe today is Earth Day, right? Or whatever they call it. And I was shocked to find a white pill in Earth and AP News, but cleaner Earth, healing ozone hole, less smog, more egos. So if you're looking for 4 things about the climate to actually be happy about, reminder, healing the ozone hole. So the ozone hole, I think originally, informally, I was talking to a friend a couple weeks ago, and I thought I told them it was already completely healed. I guess now estimates are saying it's the 2030s is when it'll be 100% healed. But I've heard from people that they used to in school have to sing songs about how we were destroying the ozone and we need to protect it. But it doesn't seem like it gets into the headlines too much these days that somehow since 1987, we're able to completely just about change that, right? We've got cleaner air and water. And so this is in regards to the United States and most of the industrialized world. Solar and wind power is now an option as well. And endangered species like the bald eagle, the American alligator, and a handful of others like the Canadian geese. There's our Canada connection. They're also, no longer nearly endangered. In fact, I think I saw an article the other day about Canada geese and how there's too many of them now. So again, those unintended consequences, they're tricky, especially when you're the government. Finally, from Sal Diagoras, this is our meme of the day. The same system that kept you in the dark about Ghislaine Maxwell and her client list doesn't mind live streaming Johnny Depp's trial. Yeah, it's really all about priorities, right? Ghislaine Maxwell found guilty of essentially trafficking children. Not a single one of her clients has been arrested or revealed to us. So you would think if you're like trafficking children for prostitution, someone had to have been on the receiving end of that prostitution, right? Don't worry about it. The government doesn't seem to be worried. Why should we be worried about that? Anyways, that's it for tonight's Maple Pill. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, smash the like button, hit subscribe. I appreciate it when you guys do that combo. If you want more Matt McKeever in your life, it's Matt McKeever Unfiltered on Instagram. Again, usually it's just me posting random news articles and a lot of shit posting memes. And that's it. So otherwise, I appreciate the fact that you guys make this a two-way conversation by jumping in that chat, sharing your opinions, your hot takes. So let's pull up the chat quick. We've got P58 in the chat. We've got Aislinn. We've got Sandra. Sandra, I got rid of that spammer. I was actually quick on that one, so that was nice. We've got Graham in the chat. Farzana, Abdul. Wish I had invested in the central bank. 450% return is nuts. Well, again, that was an increase in their asset base. So when they get to print the money, they essentially make all the rules. But I hear what you're saying, Abdul. Although, tangentially speaking, I believe that Bored Ape Yacht Clubs, I saw someone did a study on it, and it's a 270,000% return year over year if you minted a Bored Ape Yacht Club. So their thesis essentially was it was the greatest investment of all time. Which again, if you need any more justification to believe that we live in the age of hilarious, there you go. That's it. That a JPEG of a monkey could be the best investment in the history of humanity. We've got Lee in the chat. Terry, I work at a building supplier, and the estimator told me that it's roughly $400 a square foot for a new build. Jesus, I'm so happy we bought our house years ago. I feel bad for everyone saving for a house. Man, $400 a square foot. I believe you, Terry, but good Lord, that's a lot of money. Graham, abortion to save a life of mom equals okay. Any other reason equals murder. What will those cells grow into? Always a human. Ergo, killing them is killing a human. This is a 180 from where I was in my 20s. That's interesting that your position's changed as well, Graham. Again, I think the more even nuanced arguments I've seen people make on the right is that essentially like an abortion almost never has to happen. You may have to have a medical procedure in order to save the mother, and that may end up resulting in the child dying. But the key difference, right, or the distinguishing factor in that scenario versus like an abortion is the intentions weren't to kill the child, right? It might be an unintended consequence, right? Because again, the goal was to save the mother through a medical procedure, and that may result in the death. And again, like the moment I heard it laid out like that, it seemed like a very obvious perspective, right? And then again, that slogan of safe, legal, rare, all of a sudden makes a lot of sense. Where I'm like, yeah, you would want medical procedures like that to be safe, legal, and rare. But again, so much of it, I think, honestly depends on how you choose to frame it. Terry says, if you pay into EI, you should get EI. What's next? Smokers or drinkers don't get EI. Junk food eaters, besides catching COVID, is the best vax. Yeah, again, there was a time when like you would get flagged on YouTube for that immediately, where these days I think it's a little bit, they give you a little bit more wiggle room because apparently misinformation and disinformation evolves over time. Bangs gives me a couple fire emojis. Appreciate that. We've got Samsan in the chat. Benjamin, what's up? Kohana says, Graham Griffin, exactly. Come on, people. We need to vote the socialists out and never put them back in power. Remember, socialism leads to communism. Leftist ideologies are based in Marxism. Absolutely agree with you, Kohana, there on all that. And in fact, right now, one of the books I'm currently reading is The Bloodlands. And if you need any reminder of why socialism is, or why communism is pure evil, that book will do it to you, right? Like exploring things like Holodomor and just really all the atrocities that occurred in post-World War I in the Ukraine and those Bloodlands areas where, you know, more people died over that period of time than the rest of the 20th century, right? Just in that kind of region there. So definitely, if you guys are looking for a thick book to read about World War II and understanding, you know, all the atrocities that both the Nazis and communists committed in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, that's a great book. And for me, part of it's even trying to understand just more of the current conflict we find ourselves in, right? Understand the history and the context of the situation usually can be pretty illuminating on those things. Anyways, appreciate you guys. Glad you're hanging out with me on Thursday night. Hope the rest of your Thursday goes well. And that's it. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Appreciate you guys hanging out with me. And, you know, reminder, sharing is caring. I saw yesterday or 2 days ago, someone actually shared the video on Facebook, which really do appreciate that because I actually somehow got a notification from that. So that makes me think that it doesn't get shared too often because it was the first notification I think I've seen since the start of the Freedom Trucker Convoy. So I forget the name, but I really do appreciate whoever it was that was sharing it out there on Facebook. And reminder, I upload these videos on Rumble and BitChute as well, so you can always share it with people that maybe don't have Facebook accounts or for whatever reason don't want to use YouTube. And yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Web fire, math, able scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess.